Hello and welcome to this GED Live lesson on language conventions and usage for the Reasoning Through Language Arts test. This GED Live session, like all GED Live sessions, is brought to you by the GED Testing Service along with Kaplan Test Prep. I am Kaplan teacher Rachel, and I'm really excited to work through some of these really important concepts that you're going to be using to answer these types of questions correctly. Now, these are the questions that you see where you have a short paragraph or perhaps a long passage with several blanks in it. And your task is to figure out which of the answer choices correctly fills in that blank. And it looks as though we have a tremendous list of learning objectives here. But you can see that in each case, what we're doing is we're editing, right? So we are determining what is going to be the correct construction to go into the blank. And that will have to do with various types of conventions, as the title of this session implies, having to do with punctuation, capitalization, sentence structure, agreement, parallelism and agreement between nouns, verbs, and other parts of speech, pronouns and their antecedents. An antecedent is just a fancy word for the noun that a pronoun refers to. Modifiers. And then beyond some of those very concrete rules, we'll look at some of the more style-oriented concepts having to do with how to effectively use transitions, prepositions, and some commonly confused words, and how to avoid wordiness and awkward sentence construction. And as with every GED Live session, we'll give you lots of opportunities to practice. So let's go ahead and dive in. The first thing that we'll talk about is capitalization. So you already know that you will always capitalize the first word of a sentence. And of course, we have other capitalization rules as well, right? So the first word of a sentence is always capitalized. But also proper nouns, people, places, things, or ideas. Specific names of these things will be capitalized. And so the nouns that we capitalize, we call proper nouns. And the nouns that we don't capitalize, we call common nouns. Right? So while Detroit, for instance, is a city, we would capitalize Detroit, the name of the city, and Michigan, the name of the state, but of course we wouldn't capitalize the word city. Well, the World Cup is a specific tournament. We're going to capitalize World and capitalize Cup because that is the name of the tournament, but we wouldn't capitalize the word tournament itself. Right? So those are just a couple of examples there. Now, when a proper noun is used to form an adjective, those proper adjectives are also capitalized. And so, a couple of examples. French Canadian, right? So you could be a French Canadian person, or there could be a French Canadian song, let's say. And in that context, both French and Canadian would be capitalized because they are proper nouns. A play, if it was written by Shakespeare, would be a Shakespearean play. And of course, Shakespeare is a proper noun, so we would also capitalize Shakespeare in this context. Now, titles also take capitals, right? And also when somebody is addressed directly, the title is capitalized. So let's look at some examples of this. Before a name, you may have the title doctor, you may have the title senator or representative, right? Also, notice how here we are not saying Prime Minister May, for instance. We're not saying the name of the Prime Minister. We are simply addressing the Prime Minister. Now, if we were to just say the Prime Minister of Great Britain in 2018 was Theresa May, then Prime Minister wouldn't be capitalized. However, if you were addressing the Prime Minister, if you had the great honor to meet her, you would indeed write out that statement as "it's an honor to meet you," prime minister, capitalized because it's being used as a form of address. So titles get capitalized. Now, holidays, days of the week, and months, right? And so, you know, for instance, Memorial Day, Easter, you know, any day of the week, any day of any month. All right, so let's take a look at sentence structure and formation, right? So this is the foundation of how sentences get constructed correctly, right? And you want to be able to recognize a correctly constructed sentence and an incorrectly constructed sentence, because that's a huge part of this portion of the Reasoning Through Language Arts test. So first of all, a complete sentence has 3 characteristics. The characteristics that a complete sentence has to have: subject, verb, and it has to express a complete thought. Express a complete thought. So an independent clause is a clause that could stand alone as a complete sentence. So in other words, a complete sentence always has at least one independent clause in it. So for instance, if we take a look at Elaine took notes during the meeting, we have a fully independent clause. This can stand all by itself because it has a subject. Elaine is our subject. Took is our verb. And we have a complete thought because we know exactly what Elaine did and when she did it. So that is an independent clause. Now, a dependent clause does have a subject and verb, but it doesn't express a complete thought. So for instance, if this independent clause, Elaine took notes during the meeting, were to suddenly have this while in front of it, right? Okay, it's still got its subject and verb, but what happens here is, oops, let me correctly label that verb with a V. Right? What happens here is that the while causes you to say, well, okay, what happened while Elaine took notes during the meeting? You're left with this sort of question mark at the end of the sentence, right? And so that's going to make that a dependent clause. It depends on whatever comes after it, in this case, in order to make sense of the sentence. So we do not have a complete thought here. Now, a run-on sentence is 2 or more independent clauses. Okay, 2 or more independent clauses. Now, what you know about independent clauses is that they can stand alone as complete sentences. But if you put 2 of them together and you don't have the right punctuation, or you don't have the right connector word, which we'll talk about shortly, right? If you don't have the right punctuation or connection, this is what we call a run-on. Run-ons are often created when 2 independent clauses are joined with a comma, right? And so this is not the right kind of punctuation or connection to join up these 2 independent clauses. And when you read this, you may be thinking ahead already to how you might be able to fix this, right? What would you do to correct this? We'll use several examples in this session where you'll see that the sentence is written in purple. And if the sentence is written in purple, it's a clue that there is a flaw here. And so as soon as you see such a sentence, you can start thinking about how you would fix it. So Elaine took notes during the meeting is an independent clause. She used the main office computer to type them up is an independent clause, right? And again, we can label the subject and the verb. And indeed, we have a complete thought. We know what she did with the main office computer. So because these are 2 independent clauses, each one has a subject and a verb and communicates a complete thought, we cannot simply connect them with a comma. This creates a run-on. And so what we need to do is fix that somehow. A very simple way to fix it is to just go ahead and change that comma to a period, because now each of our independent clauses is actually standing alone as a complete sentence. So that is a perfect fix if you see such a run-on. So the other thing that can happen when we're thinking in terms of clauses that are independent, that can stand by themselves, or clauses that are dependent, that cannot stand by themselves because they don't express a complete thought, is that we can sometimes have what we call sentence fragments. And a sentence fragment could be missing any one of the three pieces that are necessary for an independent clause, right? And so again, we know that an independent clause has to have subject, verb, and complete thought. And so if we are missing any one of those, I mean, we could theoretically be missing more than one of them, right? But if we are missing one or more of sentence, subject, verb, or complete thought, then we have a sentence fragment. So for instance, typed up her notes is missing a subject. We don't know who typed up her notes. So let's go ahead and put Elaine back into that sentence. So we've got a subject. The computer in the main office is missing a verb. We don't know what the computer in the main office did, right? We know that the computer is the subject. In the main office is a modifying phrase. We'll talk about modifiers in a little bit that just tells us which computer we're talking about, but we still don't know what the computer did. Well, in this particular sentence, the computer in the main office rebooted. Yikes. This is a setup for disaster if Elaine's typing up her notes while that happens. Let's see. Now, when she lost her work. Now, note that here, she is the subject of this clause. Right? We've got a subject. We've got a verb, which is lost. But because this begins with the word when, which is essentially a connecting word, we need to know, well, what happened when she lost her work? This when she lost her work is connected to what, right? So we don't have a complete thought here. Let's go ahead and flesh this out with a complete thought. When she lost her work, comma, Elaine was frustrated, right? So Elaine was frustrated is an independent clause. When she lost her work tells us more about what caused her to be frustrated. And you can see that this is kind of an introductory clause that tells us more about Elaine's frustration. And so it's followed by a comma, and we'll talk about more about commas in a little bit after we cover a couple of other topics and do some practice. So beware of sentence fragments. Always look for that subject, verb, and complete thought. So how do we correctly connect or combine independent clauses into a single sentence on the GED RLA test? Well, there are two ways that this can be done correctly, with a semicolon or with a coordinating conjunction and a comma. And throughout this session, I'll be tossing about various vocabulary terms. You don't ever have to know what these vocabulary terms are to necessarily be able to name a part of speech or the function of a word in the sentence. You just need to be able to recognize what those words are doing. That's what's important. And if it helps you to be able to label them by saying, okay, this is a coordinated conjunction, I know I can use these to put two independent clauses together, then great. But the bottom line is you just need to be able to recognize when the right kind of word is used in the right kind of context. So let's go a little deeper here. So if you have a relationship between two independent clauses and you want to communicate that using a specific word that speaks to that relationship, then you're going to use some kind of coordinating conjunction. We'll list the main ones on the next slide. So Sam saw a design flaw. Again, this is a complete, right? This is an independent clause, I should say. Let me be very specific. This is an independent clause. Sam is our subject. Sam is our subject. Saw is our verb, and we know what he saw. He saw a design flaw. Okay, good. He, subject, wrote, verb. Right? We know what he wrote, so this clause communicates a complete thought. So we have two independent clauses here, and so to make this grammatically correct, to impart proper sentence structure, he wrote, so this clause communicates a complete thought. So we have two independent clauses here, and so to make this grammatically correct, to impart proper sentence structure, we're going to use a comma and a coordinating conjunction that makes sense, right? He wrote the memo because he saw a design flaw. That's why so is a conjunction that makes sense here. He saw a design flaw, and for that reason, so he wrote a memo, right? So it's important to choose the coordinating conjunction that makes sense in the context in which you're using it. And beware, because the test maker may well pop in a coordinating conjunction which grammatically looks okay, but it doesn't necessarily make sense with the sentence that it's sitting in. Now, semicolon can also be used to combine two independent clauses. And we use a semicolon when the ideas are related and they're basically equal in terms of importance. So let's look at an example of what we mean by that, because that's pretty abstract. The designers responded to the memo quickly. Again, that is an independent clause. The product shipped without issue. Another independent clause. And so we can see this sentence would follow up the sentence about Sam seeing the design flaw and having written a memo. The designers responded quickly. The product shipped without issue. So these are two important things that happened as a result of Sam's memo. Now, could we also write this another way? Could we say the designers responded to the memo quickly, comma, and the product shipped without issue? Yes. This is not the one correct way to do it. In many cases, you have an option of a semicolon or a comma and a coordinating conjunction. However, if either one could be correct, the test maker won't include both of them among the answer choices. So don't worry, you're not going to have to make some super fine-tooth comb distinction between them. Either one of these is a great way to fix what would otherwise be a run-on sentence. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and look at those coordinating conjunctions. Now there is this acronym FANBOYS, which you may or may not have heard at some point, back in the day. These are the commonly used coordinating conjunctions that, again, you can use to link up with a comma that you can use to link up to independent clauses. Let's look at some examples. Sam showed initiative. Oh, this sentence is in purple, by the way. Sam showed initiative, comma, yet his boss praised him. So we do have two independent clauses. Sam showed initiative. Subject, verb, and what did he show? Initiative. Yet his boss is the subject, praised is the verb, his boss praised him. Okay, good. That's also an independent clause, complete thought. Now, this is connected up here with a comma and a yet. But yet is not an appropriate conjunction here. Right? And you're probably saying to yourself, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Because if he showed initiative, it's perfectly logical that his boss would praise him. And so you don't want yet, because yet indicates some kind of contrast. Right? So you can see if you look at this list that but and yet indicate contrast, whereas, say, and, right, and so indicate kind of a continuation of the same idea, something that logically might follow. Nor and or are basically talking in terms of options, right? And then for has a specific purpose, right? For tells us, for what purpose, for instance, something was done. So let's take a look at another example here. My coworker offered to drive me home, and I refused. Now, maybe this would make sense if we'd already had some background about the relationship between this person and her coworker, right? But without any context, it doesn't seem to make sense. It seems that if someone offered the ride, you would take it. And so I refused, which is a complete thought, right? It is an independent clause, even though it's so very short. I is the subject, refused is the verb. It's pretty obvious what that means, right? I declined, I refused, I chose not to, right? So here, coordinating conjunction of and makes less sense than a contrasting coordinating conjunction such as but. So these are just examples of using a conjunction that makes sense in the context of your sentence. And again, note that in each case, the coordinating conjunction is preceded by a comma. So let's go ahead then at this point and do a little practice. Now, this is a very long passage. This is a letter, as you can see, written by Ellen Gardner. Or sorry, not by Ellen Gardner, but to Ellen Gardner, from a customer of the Skyview personal computer company. So we're going to work through a few of these examples. Then we'll take a look at some more rules, and then come back and finish this up and apply some of those additional rules. So let's take a look at this first example. And for this first one, excuse me, we'll walk through this together, but for all the other examples, I'll invite you to pause your video and take the time that you need to figure out what is the correct answer. So here, the letter begins. My wife and I have been loyal owners of Skyview computers for over 10 years. We are currently on our blank, which we purchased 3 months ago. Okay. Now, if you look at these choices, they're very, very similar. So we don't have to think much in terms of the construction of the sentence. And what that means is that, okay, since all the words are the same, there must be something about the way that the words are spelled, or what kind of apostrophes they have, or if there's any punctuation, which there isn't, or, as you may have already noted, we're going to focus on the fact that the capitalization differs among these 4 choices. So what needs to be capitalized? Well, the proper name of the company. The name of the company is a proper noun. That needs to be capitalized. And it's capitalized in answer choices A, B, and D. So we would know immediately that answer choice C is out. Right? But laptop computer is not the name of a product. It is not a proper noun. Neither of those is a proper noun. Right? And so we do not want laptop to be capitalized. We do not want computer to be capitalized. And therefore, the correct answer choice here is the very first one, answer choice A, which capitalizes the name of the company, but does not capitalize the common nouns laptop and computer. So let's go ahead and take a look at another example. And again, here, please do pause the video, give this a read, and I will just say, make mention of one little thing. You can see that there is a ton of text here with just one little blank. And so you may be tempted to just look at the sentence that the blank is in. The reason why you don't want to do that, right? Do read everything. You can read it fairly quickly, but it is sometimes the case that what belongs in the blank has context beyond just the one sentence that it actually appears in. It could be that something that comes before or after is going to give you important context for that blank, right? So do read everything. Pause your video, come back when you're ready, and we will discuss. Welcome back. So they're happy that this is an economical product. They can upgrade every few years. They've been delighted with the compatibility of Skyview products with software. Okay. The speed and power of our Skyview products have been. Now, we don't have any contrast, so we expect that the speed and power have been good. And so let's see what we have in the choices. Outstanding. Ah, okay. And then if we see what comes next, and notice that you can kind of scan these answer choices and see where the differences are. That'll tell you how you can quickly home in on what is important here. So if we just kind of look at this section right here, if we say the speed and power of our Skyview products have been outstanding, at that point, you want to say to yourself, wait a minute, that's an independent clause. And if I just begin another independent clause without any punctuation or with just a comma, it's going to be a problem. It's going to create a run-on. And there are actually 2 choices that do that, right? A gives us no punctuation whatsoever here, right? And C gives us a comma, but no coordinating conjunction, right? So no punctuation at all in answer choice A, and no coordinating conjunction in answer choice C means that those two are going to be run-ons and we can get rid of them. Right? Now, if we compare B and D, the two remaining choices, B says, your products, finishes the sentence, right? Starts a new sentence. Your products are always well suited to our needs. Nothing wrong with that. and if you feel really confident about that, you may choose that and go ahead and move right along. Right? You can also take a quick look at D. Give D what I like to call a courtesy glance. Always well suited to our needs. This is missing a subject. Right? What's always well suited to our needs? You need to state that subject within that sentence. Right? So D is not a proper, complete sentence, not an independent clause. That's going to be out as well. All right, let's take a look at another example. Go ahead and pause your video and come back when you're ready, and we'll discuss this and then take a look at a few more important rules. Okay, welcome back. And so again, you can see an entire paragraph here that seems like it might not be particularly relevant because the sentence we're looking at begins, I called Skyview again this morning. Okay, well, we'd need to know, what we wouldn't need to know, it would be obvious that the customer had already called Skyview. And nothing in this sentence in this paragraph has anything to do with that per se, although none of the advisors acknowledge the problem. So look, there's information here that may come up later. So research the problem, they have a history. The advisors didn't acknowledge it, they asked for the serial number, but they never mentioned that there's an ongoing problem. Okay, fine, file it away. I called Skyview again this morning. Now, notice that we have a couple of good clues here. That the sentence ends, and then a new sentence begins here. So what goes into blank 3 has to be a complete sentence. Right? So, as it turns out, all of the choices satisfy that requirement. So let's take a look at what we've got. The phone call lasted about 20 minutes, asking for help. Now, in answer choice A, we're actually looking at an issue that we're going to talk about in a little bit. It seems a little funky. Let's leave it for now. Right? Doesn't look like the right answer. Let's go on to B. Asking for help with my problem, the phone call lasted about 20 minutes. Okay, now this is also a very awkward construction, and we'll talk a little bit more about awkwardness later. But if this were to be correct, even in its awkward state, it would need to have a comma right here. Right? And again, we're going to get into commas in a little bit more detail right after this. Answer choice C. The phone call lasted about 20 minutes as I asked for help with my problem. Now notice that what we have here is independent clause. The phone call lasted about 20 minutes. As, a connecting word, I asked for help with my problem, another independent clause. So here what you can see is that these two independent clauses are joined not with a coordinating conjunction, but with a word that makes sense, a connector that makes sense with those two ideas. So C is looking great. But let's take a look at answer choice D. Asking for help on the phone call about my problem lasted about 20 minutes. Now that's got all of the ideas kind of jumbled up in a way that really, really doesn't make sense. Right? And we've got a similar issue here probably to what's going on in answer choice A. So let's just name this in kind of in preparation for one of the topics that we're going to see later. The phone call lasted about 20 minutes asking for help with my problem. And so this doesn't seem like it's so awful. It certainly doesn't sound as ridiculous as answer choice D does. Right? But the phone call lasted about 20 minutes asking for help with my problem. Well, asking for help with my problem is describing the phone call. Right? And so that means that that phrase should be right next to the phone call. Because if it's not, it just makes the sentence a lot less clear. Right? Now, granted in answer choice D, asking for help on the phone call about my problem lasted about 20 minutes. We do have about my problem next to the phone call. Okay, fine. But again, because asking for help and lasted about 20 minutes, the phone call lasted 20 minutes, but lasted 20 minutes isn't next to the phone call. That's really jumbled. So watch out for that, because that is something that the test maker will tend to put into wrong answer choices. The phrases are just put together in an order that doesn't really make sense. Right? A is wrong in a more subtle way than D is. It's not quite as easy to notice, and that's why it's really important to know these rules as kind of know them cold, right? Know them, have them really, really down by the time you take the RLA test so that you can do your best on these questions. So let's go ahead and take a look now at commas. So we have a bunch of ways that commas are used, and so you use commas when you have items in a series or a list. So in this case we have 3 people who are planning a party: Keith, Darnell, and Marisol, and we have a comma after each of the first 2 people to separate them. Also with a coordinating conjunction to separate independent clauses within a sentence, which we've already seen. Some people are insecure about hosting a party. There is an independent clause. And others have years of experience. There's another independent clause. And so those 2 independent clauses can be properly linked up by using the comma and the coordinating conjunction, comma, but. And of course, a conjunction that indicates contrast here is the right one, because you're talking about people who are insecure versus those who have years of experience. We would assume that people who have years of experience would be more secure, whereas those with a lot less experience would be less secure. Right? So we're contrasting more experience and less experience here. Alrighty, so when the sentence includes, right, we're going to have 4 uses for commas. So this is great to kind of jot down to remind yourself, okay, when are commas used? When do I need them? And when are they properly used? If you have parenthetical phrases or clauses, okay, well, we're defining that further as non-essential. And that just means basically it's extra. It's giving you extra information. So if there's stuff in a sentence that you might consider putting parentheses around it, you can put commas around it instead. So for instance, Darnell, let's check this out. Darnell is our subject, and Darnell's a veteran party planner. Here's our subject. Right? What does Darnell do? He advises. That's our verb. He advises hosts to first decide on a party theme. Okay, right there we've got an independent clause, a complete thought. So what's added here is this little bit of additional information about Darnell, that he is a veteran party planner. Because that's extra information. It's not necessarily involved in getting across the idea of this sentence here. We set that off with commas. And finally, and we saw this actually just in the last example that we looked at, we use a comma to separate an independent clause from a dependent clause, or an introductory or modifying phrase from an independent clause. So, right, when you have an independent clause and then in the sentence you have another independent or introductory clause or phrase, you're going to use commas to separate them. A comma to separate them, I should say. Let's look at an example. It's always easier when it's concrete. Note that we have here, again, an independent clause, and you can see how valuable it is. I'm repeating myself left, right, and center about these independent clauses because they are so valuable. It's so important to be able to recognize them, because you can look at this and say, okay, you may want to host a dinner party. All right, that's an independent clause, right? You is the subject, may want is the verb, and we have a complete thought communicated there. But kind of introducing the idea that you may want to host a dinner party is this if phrase, right? Or this if clause, right? It's an introductory clause. If you are a good cook, that's introductory, comma, and then your independent clause that constitutes the rest of the sentence. Right? So 4 uses for commas. Let's take a look at another important kind of rule of construction. And that's that we need parallel structure when we have words, phrases, or clauses that all appear and have the same importance within a sentence. So, for example, Jim wants to. Okay, and there are several things that Jim wants to do. He wants to eat less, exercise more, and be getting more sleep. Right? So, 3 items in the list of things that Jim wants to do. Now, if we just simply said, Jim feels that he should be getting more sleep, that would be okay. But because the other 2 things in the list are simple verbs, he wants to eat less, exercise more, then the 3rd thing also just has to be a simple verb, get more sleep. Right? And that's one place in which parallel structure is going to be called for. Another example is if you have a list and the items in the list begin with prepositions, and we'll talk a little bit more about prepositions later on, but here's an example: on busy streets, near traffic jams. So again, here's a purple sentence for you. So what would you fix? Avoid exercising on busy streets, that's a preposition. Near as another preposition, traffic jams. And polluted areas. The first 2 items in this list are preceded by prepositions, but the 3rd one isn't. We've got to fix that. We have to fix that. And so here's a perfect fix for it. The preposition in makes a whole lot of sense for polluted areas. Okay? So parallel structure requires that when you have lists or things in the sentence that are parallel, they have to have the same grammatical structure, the same grammatical form. Now let's go back to punctuation a little bit to discuss the apostrophe. Apostrophes can tend to be a little bit troublesome, so it's important to know, the 2 critical uses of apostrophes first of all. Right? So they are possession and contraction. And so, again, these are names that you don't really need to know, but they're useful because they tell us what's actually going on, right? So if we're talking about possession, that means, okay, somebody possesses something. So you could possess a car or a leash or an office. You could also, in theory, possess an idea. An idea could belong to you, right? So it doesn't have to be a concrete thing that you possess. It can also be kind of an abstract thing. But notice that in each case here, if the car belongs to the friend, it is the friend, apostrophe S's, car. If the leash belongs to the dog, it is the dog's leash. And if the office belongs to Chris, it is Chris's office. And in each case, we have an apostrophe before the S to show possession. However, we can also have plural possessive, right? So if it is more than one person or thing that owns the thing, right? If there is more than one owner of whatever is being owned, then that's called plural possessive. So for instance, if you have a break room, it doesn't belong to just you, right? And if you act like it belongs to just you, your coworkers are going to get really annoyed with you because this break room belongs to all of the workers. So it's really important that you put the apostrophe that indicates that possession in the right place, because if you just put it after the R, so that you're saying worker apostrophe S, you're saying it belongs to one worker. If you put it after the S, it's saying that that break room belongs to all the workers, which is what you want to communicate. So possession, one of the ways in which apostrophes are used. And then we have contraction. So a contraction is just where you contract a word. You make it smaller, shorter, by leaving out some of the letters. So this is the other context in which we use apostrophes, and apostrophes are correctly used on the GED RLA test. And so, for instance, you can see in this case, haven't is short for have not. So where that O would be left out is an apostrophe. Don't, short for do not. The apostrophe takes the place of the O. There is short for they are. The apostrophe takes the place of the A. And theirs is short for there is. The apostrophe takes the place of the I. And its right? It apostrophe S is just short for it is. And that's the only time that it should have an apostrophe. And this is one of those little mistakes that gets made so frequently that sometimes people have to ask themselves, wait a minute, like what is right and what is wrong? Because I see this so frequently, right? So here is an excellent rule. Pronouns, which we're going to discuss further right away, right after this slide, we'll get into some pronoun work. But pronouns, when they are possessive, do not take an apostrophe. So you know that possessives take an apostrophe, but the exception is when what possesses something in the sentence is a pronoun. So this is how you can kind of know for sure that if, for instance, you said, the dog brought its leash to its owner. Let me actually type that one out. The dog brought its leash to its owner, right? And I don't know if your dog's ever done this, but it's about the cutest thing ever. I haven't had a dog in many years, but so I was like, let's go for a walk. It's pretty awesome. But because, right, this is, okay, its leash. Whose leash is it? The leash belongs to the dog, right? So we have some possession here. So the dog brought its leash. This pronoun it is referring back to the dog. This is possessive, right? Because the leash belongs to the dog, but we do not use an apostrophe. And likewise for owner, right? The owner belongs to the dog also. The dog belongs to the owner. And so, let's see, this its, right? This is also the dog. But the owner, right, like that. So actually, I think I want its owner. I think I want that to go here. I think I want that to go that way. Anyway, the bottom line is possession. When you're indicating that something belongs to someone, you need an apostrophe, except when the thing to whom or to which it belongs is a pronoun. So let's talk more about pronouns now. So a pronoun is a word that replaces a noun, and this word in antecedent came up right at the beginning of our lesson in the learning objectives. So I defined it briefly then, but now we're really getting into this. So the antecedent is the word in the sentence that's being replaced by the pronoun. And again, you don't have to know the name of this, you just have to be able to recognize how it's used. So for instance, Stephen lost his address book. Now it would be possible to restate, to name Stephen again in this sentence, right? We could say Stephen lost Stephen's address book. But that sounds really clunky and awkward, right? I think people would look at you funny if you said that. Stephen lost Stephen's address book. Why does that person love saying Stephen so much? So instead, we use a pronoun. Stephen lost his address book. Okay. So the antecedent here is Stephen, right? He's the antecedent. The noun, the proper noun, in fact, to which that pronoun is referring. All right. Now, notice that when you have a pronoun, the pronoun has to match up. It has to agree with the antecedent. So, for instance, Stephen lost his address book. Now, if we go to the next sentence, it is possible that a pronoun in one sentence, such as this one right here, can refer back to something that actually was in a previous sentence, right? So here, if we say it contained, you're going to know, of course, that what contained many important phone numbers? Well, that would have been Stephen's address book, right? So we don't necessarily say the address book contained many important phone numbers, but we say it contained many important phone numbers. And the agreement here is in the fact that the address book is singular, there's one of them, and it is a singular pronoun. Okay, so again, there's your antecedent, and there's your pronoun. So let's take a look at different types of pronouns. We've already seen a couple of them. So there can be a subject pronoun that replaces the subject of a sentence. So for instance, in the previous example, we had it was the subject, and it was replacing the address book. Right? We can have an object pronoun that replaces an object. So if, for instance, we said, Stephen, let's say Stephen missed being able to access his address book after he lost it, right? Then it would be something that Stephen had lost. That's not a subject. So it can also be a pronoun that acts as an object. An object is the thing that something happens to in the sentence, right? The object is something that something happens to. And so, of course, we've got the me, you, him, her kind of personal pronouns, and then it and them can be used not necessarily for people, but for things, right? But I, you, he, she, and we typically are referring to people, right? And then we've got our possessive pronouns here. And so you can see these are the pronouns that show ownership, and we saw the possessive pronoun his in the previous example where Stephen missed his address book, and we've used it up here as well, right? And so pay attention to whether your pronoun is standing in for a subject, in which case you're going to use a subject pronoun, or an object, in which case you're going to use an object pronoun. Okay, so 3 types of pronouns. So with all of that new kind of material to work with, let's head back into our example. And again, just a reminder, notice that none of the possessive pronouns here are using apostrophes. Right? None of the possessive pronouns use apostrophes, ever, ever, ever. Okay? So let's go back into our practice with the Skyview computer customer. So previously on Skyview computer letter, we had the computer owner saying, I mentioned the information I had learned. So to just kind of get you back into the swing of things here, I mentioned the information that I had learned and was told that there is a shortage of the parts necessary for repair. So go ahead and read on from here. You can pause your video, make your choice for question number 4, and then come back when you're ready. Welcome back. So our customer here has now been told by a customer service rep that the repair could take 2 months because there's a shortage of parts, and the customer is not happy. This is not acceptable. And then blank 4 is the beginning of the next sentence. And it says, we have the verb, conduct business from home, and need daily access to our computer. So we've got a couple of verbs here, right? Conduct and need. So we need a subject, naturally, for those 2 verbs. So here's a verb, what's going to be our subject? And if you take a look at these choices, there's something that should jump out at you right away, which is that we've got an object pronoun, me, used in both B and C. So they are going to be out. Now, of course, A, my wife and I, you may have recognized right away as, oh, that's absolutely perfect. That's got to be the correct answer. Right? Whereas D, I and my wife would be a rather awkward and unusual way to say this. It wouldn't necessarily be wrong, but there would be no need for a comma in between I and my wife. Right? And there would be no need for this we, which just simply restates my wife and I. Right? So D is out because of that redundancy. And again, because the answer choices often introduce different types of errors, in each of our examples we tend to get some previews of what's coming up next. So the idea of redundancy, or something being overly wordy, or saying something unnecessary or unnecessarily, is also something to watch for. Let's go ahead and move on. So, just if you haven't already read, we believe it's unreasonable for Skyview to ask us to transport our computer at our expense. Okay. Customers don't like the solution that Skyview is proposing. Let's see what's next. So take your time here, pause your video, and come back when you're ready. Welcome back. And so what you find when you go to the choices here, they had to do something before they learned the truth of their situation. Okay, what did they have to do? Looking at the choices, we can see that it was phone calls, emails, and research. 3 things: phone calls, emails, and research. So what we're going to need is to have those 3 things that are listed here in the proper parallel form, right? So they had to make 6 phone calls. Okay, well that seems like we're getting off to a good start, but look what happens after that. Make 6 phone calls, 2 emails. Well, we're missing a verb here because you don't make an email, right? You write an email. So if we have a verb here for making phone calls, we need to also have a verb here for emails, and that's missing. Let's get rid of A right away. Let's also get rid of B right away, because we had to have made 6 phone calls is a verb tense that is way more complicated than it needs to be, right? All we have to say is we had to make 6 phone calls. That's out immediately. No reason for that. And if you jump down now to answer choice D, notice that D says we had to be making 6 phone calls, which again, there's no reason for that. It's actually called I think it's called a progressive tense. The name doesn't matter, but be and then verb and then ing is almost never going to be correct. Almost never, right? There's no reason to complicate the issue. Stick with make, and let's then make sure that C continues on consistently in the way that it has to. What do we have? Make 6 phone calls, write 2 emails, and do our own research. Excellent. That's the choice. And as you were evaluating these choices, you may have even noticed some other flaws or problems that I didn't discuss. And if so, good work. So keep those eagle eyes focused. Keep your eyes on the prize here. Now we can see that there's another blank here, so we'll let you keep reading and go on to question number 6 and fill that one in. So pause your video and come back when you're ready. Welcome back. So we have a couple of sentences, just introducing the idea that they want Skyview to give them satisfaction. And so the sentence of interest says, if our laptop has a problem which makes it unusable, Skyview should immediately replace it with one that works, with as little convenience to blank as possible. Now, we know from reading this that this appears to be some small business. There is the letter writer, and the letter writer also has referred to his wife. So there are at least 2 people that are the subject here, right? Or I shouldn't even use the word subject, right? But there are 2 people who would be inconvenienced. And so we're looking for something plural. And the plural object pronoun here is us. Right? It wouldn't be it wouldn't be him. And in theory, we could use both, but both would also need to have both is not a pronoun, right? So we'd still need a pronoun in there, and it would have to say both of us, which would again be kind of unnecessary and redundant. No way D is correct. It's got to be B with the plural object, first person pronoun us. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit more about first, second, and third person when we talk about verbs and subject-verb agreement. Coming right up after we do question number 7, which is the last question associated with this passage. So good luck on this last one. Pause and come back when you're ready. So in this one, when we look at the answer choices, we look forward to hearing from you. And then we know we have to be able to match up with this intend that comes after the blank. And so we look at the choices, and immediately we can see that from you is no different. And so we're looking at what happens after that. When we get to choice A, right? I think we're really just going to have to go choice by choice here to see what we've got. We look forward to hearing from you with regarding to. No. You can say regarding, or you can say with regard to, but the ing and the with and to together don't work. Two choices, with regard to or regarding. A's got to be out. We look forward to hearing from you about, nice simple word, how you intend to resolve this issue. Sounds pretty good. Did you give C and D a courtesy glance? We look forward to hearing from you in answer choice C about how they. No, we are still addressing the CEO of this company. That's who this letter was addressed to. And so there's no reason to bring in this, again, third person pronoun they that's referring to some other group of people, whoever that might be. And then we have, and here's where just the sense of the sentence is important, and these are prepositions, which again we're going to talk about a little bit later on. So choosing the right preposition is important, right? C can't possibly be right, but would we look forward to hearing from you with how you intend to resolve? Well, no. The proper pronoun that makes the most sense here is about, right? They're going to be told about how the issue is going to be resolved. So, great work on this practice set, part 1 and part 2. Let's go ahead and go on and look at our last group of rules and errors that you want to be looking out for. So, subject-verb agreement. This is the idea that the subject and verb have to match in person, and we'll talk about that, and also in number, singular subject with singular verb, plural subject with plural verb. So let's talk about what we mean by person, first, second, third person. I am studying. This would be the first person. You're referring to yourself, right? Then, and so I is first person, and am goes with first. You are studying. Notice how even though you could be a single person, we're suddenly using are, right? We don't say you is studying because are just goes with you. That's what goes with the second person, right? So here's our second person. You are studying. And then finally, so second person is you, first person is I or we, second person is you, and then third person is they, right? Some other group of people. Now they, in this case, because it is plural, right, is always going to have the plural verb to go along with it. All right, so that's first, second, and third person. So person has to match, number has to match. So let's make sure that we're putting singular with singular and plural with plural. So for instance, this is an interesting thing about the English language. She is a singular pronoun. That's just one person. And the singular verb that goes along with that is works, right? If we're using the verb work here, then works is the singular form. It has an S on the end of it, right? Which might seem a little bit counterintuitive because a singular noun typically doesn't have an S, right? So we might say the team works really hard. It's one team, it works really hard. But if we said the teams, then we're talking about plural teams. We have an S on the end of the noun, but we take off the S from the verb. They work really hard, right? So it's important to keep that distinction straight. Singular versus plural. Single subject, singular subject, singular verb. Plural subject, plural verb. Now, this can get into a little bit more complexity. So let's take a look. There's such a thing as a compound subject. So sometimes the subject doesn't really, sometimes a sentence doesn't really just have one person or thing doing the action, but more than one person or thing does the action, and that can be called a compound subject. So when a compound subject, when the two people or two or more people are joined by the word and, that makes it plural. So Tricia and her sister are caring for their mother. Okay? However, if the compound subject is joined by or an either or a neither nor, then the verb isn't necessarily going to be plural. Then it's going to agree with the subject that is closest. So let's take a look at a couple of examples of this, the closest subject. So for instance, either a health aide or a nurse visits each day, right? We have an or here connecting our compound subject, right? Our compound subject is health aide and nurse, because it could be one or the other of those two healthcare professionals. So because they're joined by or, we look at the nurse to tell us that we need a singular verb, which is visits. Okay. On the other hand, here's a different example. Neither my sister nor my brothers have medical training, because here, right, we've got a neither nor. Here we had an either or. Here we have a neither nor. So neither my sister nor my brothers. Now in this case, brothers are the closest thing to the verb. And so since brothers is plural, we need a plural verb, have medical training. All right, so keep track of that rule. That'll definitely help you to get some points. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at modifiers. We've seen an example of modifier. We've seen a couple of examples of modifiers earlier. Right? Modifiers just give you more information. They describe. They give more detail. They describe something in the sentence. So modifiers can take basically three different forms. They can be adjectives, adverbs, or entire modifying phrases. Right? So let's take a look at that in a bit more detail. Right? Adjectives, adverbs, or modifying phrases. So, if you need to modify a noun, you're going to use an adjective. If you need to modify anything other than a noun, right? And if you notice that what we have listed here is what adverbs modify verbs, adjectives, and other adverbs. Well, this essentially is anything but a noun, right? Anything else but a noun is modified by an adverb. So, for example, the blue car drove quickly down the road. In this sentence, we have a couple of modifiers, right? We have the modifier blue, which is an adjective, and blue is modifying car. Car is a noun. Okay, so far so good. Then, oh, well, how did the car drive? Drive is a verb. In this case, it's a past tense verb. We have drove, right? The car drove how? The car drove quickly. Quickly is an adverb being used to modify that verb, drove. So always ask yourself when you read a sentence, okay, this modifier, if you're looking at the difference between an adjective and an adverb, and usually the way you can tell the difference is that adverbs have this ly ending, then ask yourself that important question. What is actually being modified? What's being described here? And that's going to help you to choose the right type of modifier. Now, when it comes to modifiers, they do need to be as close as possible to the thing that they're modifying. And again, this goes back to one of the issues that we saw with an earlier example. When a modifier isn't placed as close as it could be to the thing that it's modifying, it creates what we call a dangling modifier or a misplaced modifier. And so that can cause a lot of confusion. And look for sentences that don't make sense, essentially because a modifier has been misplaced. So, for example, parking in a tow zone, comma, right, looks like an introductory phrase. It's modifying something. Let's see what. The police officer gave us a ticket. So in this sentence, you can see it's a purple one, so something funky is going on here. In this sentence, parking in a tow zone is our modifier, and the way where it is placed at the beginning of the sentence, it looks like it's modifying the police officer. Clearly, it wasn't the police officer who was parking in the tow zone, so this sentence needs to be rearranged or reworded to reflect that, right? To reflect properly who was parking in the tow zone and who got the ticket. So we can do that by making that modifier a lot clearer. Because we parked in a tow zone, the police officer gave us a ticket, right? Because that has now been turned into a more explanatory introductory phrase, right? It really explains what's going on. Now we have the clarity that we need with that modifying phrase. All right, so now we're going to get a little bit more into back into sentence construction and even a little bit maybe of paragraph construction with transitions, right? So transitions can occur within a sentence, or a transition can begin a sentence to relate it to the previous sentence. And so whenever a transition is used, you want to think about the relationship, right? The relationship is crucial. And so, you know, some examples of this were about how Sam had been performing well. Sam showed initiative, so his boss gave him a raise. That's a very logical transition. So now it happens to be a coordinating conjunction, but it's a coordinating conjunction that makes sense, right? And all of your transitions have to make sense. So let's take a look at some examples. Oops. All right, here we go. So, you know, you can have a transitional word or phrase such as for example or for instance. That's naturally going to be introducing an example. Then you've got, for instance, these continuation words, right? And also in the same way, right? This is where you're continuing on with something that is the same or similar. Sometimes, though, you want to contrast ideas, and in that case, you'll use these contrasting transition words, however, but nevertheless, on the other hand, words and phrases of that type. You can show that something happened in a particular order by using these words. Show cause using the word because, or potentially since. And show a result by using as a result or consequently. And draw a conclusion, and of course these are also words that you're looking for in the reading passages that you do for the Reasoning Through Language Arts test. Words such as therefore and thus indicate that the author has drawn a conclusion. So you always want to be on the lookout for transition words that are used to make sure that they're being used correctly and in a way that makes sense. Now, we promised that we'd talk a little bit more about prepositions, so let's go ahead and have a look here. Now, prepositions are connecting words. They show relationships between a noun or a noun phrase or a pronoun and some other word. And it can be, you can get relationships between nouns or noun phrases or pronouns and a lot of different things using prepositions. And so again, it's usually easier to think about you know, some examples than to simply talk about this in the abstract. So you might say, I am studying with my friends. With is an example of a preposition. I am going to work. To is an example of a preposition. If you use the wrong preposition, though, and again, we've seen an example of this where, you know, for instance, you would hear back from someone about the resolution rather than hearing back from someone with the resolution, right? If you use the incorrect preposition, it can really confuse the sentence or make it nonsensical. It can make it unclear or potentially nonsensical. So let's look at this example. I will be competing with my roommate during the softball game. It's not really clear what this means. Does this mean that I and my roommate are on the same softball team, so we will be competing together against somebody else? I don't really know. So if you use this specific pronoun, against, then it's clear, right, that I and my roommate are going to be on different teams and we'll be competing against each other. Right? So using the right preposition is important. and if I think I might have just said pronoun, so if I did, please excuse me. Preposition. Against is a preposition that makes this relationship clear, right, between the roommate and myself. So here is a preposition list. Now, it's really good to be able to recognize all of these prepositions and, you know, just think about what they mean, what kind of relationship they imply, right, and how they might be properly used, right? So, you know, for instance, you might be pleased with the results of your studying for the GED RLA test, right? You might feel as though you are competing against your classmates for a great score. However, you're really not, right? Because all of you are in this together. You're all working toward the same goal, and there is plenty of room for all of you to succeed after you get the score that you need to pass, right? And so these are all about relationships. It can be a lot of fun to create sentences using prepositions just to sort of get used to them and really learn to recognize them, because they can give you clues as to what a correct or an incorrect construction might be. So let's go ahead and just take a look at a couple more concepts that you're going to see tested in these writing questions. First off is homonyms, right? They're words that sound alike, but they mean something different, and they are spelled differently. And some common homonyms that can be confused are possessives and contractions, or not necessarily that possessives and contractions are homonyms, but they are examples of things that are often confused. So let's take a look. And note that we're talking here about spelling items. The GED test GED RLA test doesn't really test you on spelling, but this is the one case in which it will, when a word is commonly mistaken, used mistakenly in place of another one. So our examples here, then and then, right? So make sure that if you're using a comparison, you might say, I did better the second time I took the GED RLA test than I did the first time, right? Accept versus accept. You accept a job offer, right? But you might make an exception, right? I will accept that job offer, except if they're not paying me enough money, right? So accept means that you take something, you agree to take something on. Accept means you're making an exception. You're saying, okay, well, under these circumstances, that's not going to happen. Break and break, right? If you take a break from work, that's different from if you hit the brakes on your car. Led and led. Led is this is the past tense of the verb to lead, and this is one that's quite commonly mixed up. Led, right? This would be to lead, but if it's past tense, then it needs to be led. This is led like that soft, toxic metal that you want to keep away from. 2, 2, and 2 you want to pay attention to. The 3 theirs are big sources of error. Are, right? Plural of to be versus our, belonging to us. And past versus past, right? We use past when we're actually using it as a verb, right? I passed my neighbor when I was walking down the street, right? So then I would want this past tense, which is P-A-S-E-D. I passed my neighbor walking down the street. However, we love to hear from past students about their successes. In fact, a student popped into the classroom the other night to share her exciting results about the tests that she had passed, right? So past students we've had in the past, that describes the students, sometimes come back to share with us information about the tests that they have passed, meaning in the past tense, they passed a test. That's pretty confusing, but you can keep it straight if you know whether you're looking at the verb or the adjective, all right? So make sure that you watch out for those potentially confusing words. And finally, make sure that you watch out for wordiness, right? if something is repetitive, if it repeats a word or a phrase or an idea unnecessarily, that's going to be something to watch out for and something to get rid of. You're going to edit to remove that kind of thing. So a repetitive example here in purple, in addition to also volunteering, Caleb is employed by the library where he gets paid. So, you can see that there are a couple of sources of redundancy here. You wouldn't need to use both in addition to and also, right? In addition and also are both saying the same thing. And if you're employed, chances are you're getting paid, but even if, even if you could consider non-profit, not even non-profit, but, unpaid volunteer employment, because it says in addition to volunteering, we know that the other thing that's going to be mentioned in the sentence is going to be some kind of paid employment. So we can really clean this up by getting rid of some of those unnecessary words and phrases. In addition to volunteering, right? Goodbye, also. We don't need you. Caleb is employed by the library, and we don't need this phrase either. All right? So again, watch out for where too many words are being used or when ideas or concepts are being repeated unnecessarily. So now let's go ahead and work through some more practice. We have several passages to work through here, and so you can do these all together, or you can always come back, do some of the practice now, come back and do some of the practice later, but we will work through every single question on your PDF for this session. So let's go ahead and get started. As always, I will invite you to pause the video, and if you would like to do so, you can, consider these blanks. You can kind of look at your PDF and consider these blanks all at once, right? Rather than necessarily working through one at a time, as I am going to do with you. So since you'll have all the questions in your PDF, you can do all the questions at once and then come back and just review the explanations, the answers and explanations with me if you're so inclined. So go ahead and pause here and let's think about what we need to do for question number 8. And welcome back. So we can see that all the answer choices. Adoption is a legal procedure that gives something to someone, right? And so all of the answer choices begin with a person. But that's as far as we go before we run into differences between the answer choices or among the answer choices. So let's go ahead and take a look. A person. Now, what's interesting here is if we think about the concepts of modification that we just discussed, there actually is only one choice that can be correct here. Because we're talking about having the rights of a son or daughter. And so the only person that those rights could be given to would be the adoptive son or daughter. And who is getting those rights? A person is getting those rights. So if you look at the way that these answer choices are constructed, there's only one choice that puts the correct modification about not being the birth child next to that person. There is only one, and it's answer choice B. So this is a nice, clear issue of modification. This phrase, this is the idea of the phrase that's modifying needs to be right next to the thing that's being modified. What kind of person? A person who is not the birth child. Boom, you're done. Nothing else does that. Nothing else can be right. It's a great example of how when you really know these rules cold, you can get through these a lot more quickly and efficiently. So go ahead then, if you would please, and check out the next question, number 9. Pause and come back when you're ready. Now here we need to begin this sentence. We've already got the introductory sentence for the paragraph, which says adoption may be handled through an agency or by independent placement. And if you're looking ahead and using all the context, you may notice that the second sentence here talks about in an independent placement. which means that this first part must surely be talking about an agency. And so we want to make sure that that agency is actually mentioned in the answer choice. And right away, we see that answer choice D doesn't talk about the agency. So it can't be right. Okay? So let's go ahead and look at the remainder of these choices. Notice that answer choice A and answer choice B both begin with some kind of introductory phrase, going through an agency and undergoing a home study. And so in each case, if we have this opening phrase followed by a comma, it's going to be modifying. It's going to be giving us more information. And it has to be right next to the thing that it's modifying. So again, we can look at this through the lens of modification. So, is it a home study that goes through an agency? No. It is the prospective parents, the adoptive parents, who go through an agency. That can't be right. Okay? Is it the agency that undergoes a home study? No. It is the prospective parents that undergo a home study. So, A and B are out by looking carefully at the modification. Right? And you may have picked C. If you picked C, you may have picked it for another reason, which is simply that it is so straightforward and concise. There's no wordiness or awkwardness. You can see just by looking at it that it's just, I mean, it's actually not that much shorter, but it is shorter than all of the choices except for B, and B doesn't use modification properly. An agency, here's our subject. And so again, thinking about the subject verb setup of the sentence, what this sentence does, answer choice, when you choose answer choice C, which of course is correct, is gives us our subject. An agency, subject, requires, verb, a home study. That's actually our object. The home study is our object, the thing that the action is being done to, right? To determine blah, 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 whether prospective parents will be fit. Okay, and so when you see that very straightforward subject-verb construction, that's an excellent clue that you are looking at the correct choice. So, you know, even if you have trouble finding modification errors, you know that you want to go for something that's nice and straightforward. Let's go ahead and move on to question number 10. Take your time and come back when you're ready to review. Looks like we might have another potential modification issue here. Let's see where these choices start to diverge. A, B, and C all say lawyers handle these adoptions. When? Right? And so handle these adoptions when? And then we have a difference among A, B, and C after that. So, do lawyers handle adoptions when asked frequently? That doesn't seem quite right. In other words, you have to ask the lawyer a lot in order to get the lawyer to handle the adoptions. And in fact, B really says the same thing, when asked frequently or when frequently asked. Right? So, A and B are giving us the wrong meaning, but it's because, again, of the modification. Now, notice that frequently, so let's take a look at where frequently shows up in each of these choices, right? When asked frequently. In each case here, it's the asking that is frequent. But in fact, what needs to be done frequently? What does the sentence mean to say is done frequently? Well, that's actually the lawyers handling the adoptions. And if you happen to notice right off the bat that answer choice D had that different construction, and it says lawyers frequently handle, you may have noticed right away that that's the only choice that makes sense. Right? When you stick frequently at the end, it starts to really muddy up the modification that's going on here, and that's a pretty strong indicator that that's going to be an incorrect choice. So lawyers frequently handle. frequently, it again is an adverb. Here is our adverb modifying the verb handle. And when do they handle these adoptions? When they're asked. Boom. Nice and straightforward and simple. So good work with the adoption passage. Let's go ahead and move on and check out another one. Sales trainee. Just 2 questions here. So go ahead and give question 11 a shot. Come back when you're ready and we can review. And what you may have noticed here is that this sentence begins. Now here we're kind of going way back to the idea of independent clauses and introductory phrases and clauses and how we need to use commas. Because you can see in the answer choices, right, that when we get after questions, we have a choice of comma or no comma. Well, do we need a comma here? You bet we do. We most certainly do, because if you've answered yes to these questions, and let's just put our parentheses there, right? Then we go on after that to, we need your skills at Macro Software. We need your skills at Macro Software. Independent clause, right? Independent clause. That introductory phrase or clause must have a comma after it. We can immediately say goodbye to A and B. And we're down to C and D, and now we have the distinction of your versus your. So contraction that sounds like a non-contraction, and what we need here is just the possessive. Right? We need the possessive, your skills, the skills that belong to you. And again, if you remember that you is a pronoun, this can be a really good way to quickly, just nail down what's the correct answer, because these do cause a lot of confusion. Your and your, there. They're deadly, right? But if you say, well, wait, we need your skills, that's a possessive pronoun. Possessive pronouns never have apostrophes. Boom, you're done. Answer choice D is correct. So let's go ahead and take a look at question number 12. Macro Software is one of the industry leaders in software distribution. Now, we know that we've got this another introductory phrase here, in addition to our chain of stores. So let's just go ahead and look at in addition to our chain of stores first. Now, this is an introductory phrase. In each case, we do have the comma, right? So here we don't get to eliminate choices just on the basis of a missing comma. But we can start to eliminate on the basis that, of course, we want the the possessive pronoun our here. We don't want the word hour, which refers to an hour of time. So, okay, goodbye to answer choice A right away. And then let's see what other differences we have. We're proud. In addition to our chain of stores, we're proud. And so what do you want here? We are proud is short for we are proud. It is a contraction. It's missing a letter. Right? So we don't want the choice that doesn't have an apostrophe. We need that apostrophe because it's a contraction. Right? This is we are. And so goodbye to answer choice C. And I'm looking at these choices and I'm saying, right, this won't do. I'm looking at these choices and saying, well, wait, what's the other difference? There's another comma in answer choice D, which is totally unnecessary. This isn't one of the places where we use a comma. Right? In addition, by itself, doesn't constitute an introductory phrase. In addition to our chain of stores, that constitutes an introductory phrase. That gets a comma after it. In addition doesn't. And so beware of the overuse of commas. That can happen pretty commonly. So the answer is B. So good work on sales trainee. The next couple of examples just have 2 questions each, so let's check them out. Here we have unemployment insurance. So take a look at this one, pause, come back when you're ready. So fairly straightforward sentence here. Each state blank its own laws. But we see that there are actually two things that each state does, right? Each state, when we look at our choices, each state administers and has, right? And that's what's crucial. Each state, this is singular. So if you recognize that this was a singular versus plural issue here, well done. We needed to match our singular subject state with two singular verbs. And so, all right, let's see what we have here. Administer without the S is plural, so it's out. Right? Goodbye to answer choice B. Have is also plural. Goodbye to choice A, goodbye to choice D. Oh, we're done. Right? So again, notice how being really aware of what the issues are allows you to get through the choices so quickly. Right? This has one singular and one plural, which is no good. Right? This has one plural and another plural, so that's no good. This has one singular and another singular. That's our correct answer. Let's give it a blue box. And D has not only singular and plural, but you may have also picked up on the fact that this possessive it, again, pronoun possessive apostrophe. So that's another flaw with answer choice D. It's wrong twice over. So good, let's move on to question number 14. Something about the amount received. Let's take a look. Pause and come back when you're ready. And so while in the previous example, we had two different verbs that we needed to match with the singular subject state, here we have that compound subject situation, right? We have two things that go into deciding the amount received. So it's wage level and length of employment. Two, it's a compound subject, two things joined by and. That's going to be plural. So right away we know that we need determine and not determined, right? Determine is our plural verb here, determine. So B is out. That's the only one that we can eliminate immediately using that particular rule. So let's go ahead and take a look at C. C is another great example of an unnecessarily complicated verb tense. There's no reason to say would be determined by, right? Also, by gives it a totally different meaning, right? It's wage level and length of wage level and length of employment determine the amount. They are not determined by the amount. So C gets really goofy, not only by giving us an overly complex verb construction, but also by including that preposition that totally changes the meaning of the sentence. Goodbye, answer choice C. And then there is absolutely no reason to use this future tense, right, with a kind of transitional, future sense to it. This whole passage, and if you want to make sure that that's correct, this is a great example of, again, where you're using other context from the passage, not necessarily just what's in this sentence, because this sentence doesn't give us very much. Each state blanks its own laws. Okay, but when you look at the rest of the passage, right, you can see that the whole sentence is written in the present tense. Unemployment insurance provides workers with partial replacement of their salaries. When the unemployment rate rises above a certain level, states are required to extend the benefits, and the state and federal governments share the cost. So there's no reason why you'd want to go into the future tense just for this, just as D does. There's no call for it. And here answer choice A is correct. So let's go ahead and take a look at another example, this one concerning three-way calling. Great work so far. Keep it up, or come back later if you're getting tired, which we would understand. All right, here's another great example for you to check out. Three-way calling, question number 15. Pause and come back when you're ready. And so one of the things that might have jumped out at you when you looked at these choices immediately, it says it's a unique service that enables you to conduct a conference blank, and then it says privacy of your own home. So that word from that appears in all of the answer choices, you can get why that's there. Okay, you're conducting a conference call from the privacy of your own home. So do we actually need any of this other stuff? Right? Can we split this up into two sentences? Well, no, you're not going to say, enables you to conduct a conference call, independent clause, complete sentence, and from the privacy of your own home, right? And now, while in speech, that may be something that you would say, if I was excited about this, three-way calling, like, oh my gosh, I'm talking to my friend about it, right? Three-way calling, it's so cool. You can conduct a conference call from the privacy of your own home. You can conduct a conference call and from the privacy of your own home. I might make it seem as though that's a separate sentence, but it's not, because it starts with a conjunction, and you can't do that, right? So that's not right. Likewise, B doesn't make any sense. It from the privacy of your own home doesn't even have a verb, right? So no way A or B can be correct. Let's go ahead and get rid of them right away. And, if you actually looked at the idea of what belonged in this blank, you may have immediately said, well, you conduct a conference call from the privacy of your own home. There is no need to complicate that anymore, right? You don't need to start a new sentence. You don't need to change to, again, a more complicated verb tense, an ing verb that's not really called for. No need to do any of that. Keep it simple. All right, good. Let's take a look at the second question here. For instance. So again, this is preceded by, it's even possible to seek a third person's advice when you're in the middle of a regular call. So, okay, you know that they're going to give us an example of a third, in bringing a third person in to give that advice. And so the example that they're giving us is if you're closing a deal, you can invite your lawyer to the conversation. So let's see where we start to see differences among these choices. So first place we see a difference is, and again, notice that you're not reading each choice in to see if it makes sense. You're just saying, okay, where is the difference? If you're closing a deal. Now, each of these has a comma, so I know that that's not a distinction that I need to be concerned with. If you're closing a deal, you can bring. Either you bring or you can bring. What you don't want is this missing you right here. So B can't be correct, right? You know that you need to have a subject for that independent clause that finishes up this sentence, right? If you're closing a deal, for instance, if you're closing a deal is an introductory phrase, we need an independent clause to finish this out. All right, so goodbye to B. So if you're closing a deal, you bring in your lawyer into the conversation. Now, I would tell you that if I compare A, C, and D, I feel like you can bring makes a whole lot more sense. But you don't even have to use that, right? Because yes, I like you can bring better, but look what else is going wrong here. You bring in your lawyer into the conversation. This is a small, subtle thing that can be easy to overlook, but it's a case of redundancy, right? That preposition of bringing the lawyer in is repeated, and you don't want that. So we can get rid of A on that basis. Then let's go ahead and compare C and D. You can bring versus you can bringing. Well, C it is, right? Again, no need for that ing on the end of the verb bring there. And C is correct. You can bring your lawyer into the conversation. Perfect. That's our independent clause. Excellent. So let's move on. We've got 2 more passages for you to work with. So let's go ahead and take a look. And again, you can do any of these all the way through and then come back and just review with us when you're ready. 3 blanks here. We will go through them one by one. So pause, come back when you're ready with number 17. So, all right, low-fat cooking is the topic here, and each of our choices begins with the phrase "for starters." And I'm kind of hoping that you're having the moment, or you just had the moment that I had when I looked at this and thought about it from the perspective of, I have an introductory phrase, "for starters." Because if you think about that, what do you need after an introductory phrase before you dive into your independent clause? Use cooking methods that require little or no oil or butter. What do you need? You need a comma. Only one choice has that comma. Only one choice could be correct. Boom, you're done. It does not matter what other differences there are among the answer choices. It has to be A, because only A inserts the comma that you need after your introductory phrase. Ooh, thank you, test maker. Look for opportunities to grab those quick points. Okay? Let's go on to number 18. So, give us your best shot. Check back with us when you're ready. So here, vinegar can be used without oil in salad dressing. We know it's going to be dressing. The flavor can be enhanced with fresh herbs. Okay. So let's see what our options are here, because here we got to maybe think a little bit about each one. Now, when I see answer choice A, it does look very good to me, because what it does is vinegar can be used without oil in salad dressing. Right? So here's independent clause number 1. It's just ending here, independent clause. That's IC for independent clause number 1. Then we have a comma and a coordinating conjunction "and" from our fanboys list. The flavor can be enhanced with fresh herbs. So this is independent clause number 2. A is looking great. And I might actually be confident enough to just go ahead and pick it, but let's see what's going on with these other choices. B incorrectly puts the comma after the coordinating conjunction rather than before, right? So goodbye, B. C uses a coordinating conjunction that doesn't make sense, right? Because we're being told that these are two things that can, or actually we're not. What we're being told is that we're using vinegar, but we're not using oil. And how does that low-fat version still help us to, have something that tastes good, right? How do we still get it to taste good? So this is definitely an and, not an or situation, right? Because if you're just saying the flavor can be enhanced with fresh herbs, then you're saying that this is an alternative. Maybe you haven't left out the oil, right? So it has to be something that goes along with leaving out the oil. So that's why C is out. That's a little subtle, right? But meaning is important. And then what happens with answer choice D? Vinegar can be used with oil in salad dressing. That would be independent clause number 1. And then what would happen is that independent clause number 2 would not have a conjunction. It would have a comma, but no conjunction. Because, for example, comma, you would need a comma here as well. The flavor can be enhanced with fresh herbs. First of all, for example, doesn't really make sense. Second of all, it begins a whole new independent clause, and we don't have the right kind of connector. So answer choice A is correct here. And this may be one that you can kind of tell just by looking at it that it's correct. And the more you can kind of delve into the reasons why, as you're working through some of these examples in practice, the better honed your skills will be so that you can recognize more of these errors on test day. So let's take a look at the last blank for low-fat cooking. Many foods come in a blank. Ooh, then we have pretty long fill-in here. Oh, a low-fat version. Then we see and though. So we've got a connector issue here. Though not all of them may be pleasing to the palate, some are. Okay, so that's a dependent clause that's coming at the end of this sentence. Let's make sure that we connect the clauses up correctly and keep an eye on any other little errors that might slip in along the way. And so here, again, we've got an independent clause, and then we've got what could be an independent clause, right? And we need to connect them up properly, because if you look at this first part, many dairy foods, and let's go ahead and underline the first part here, many dairy foods come in a low-fat version, comma, right? Now, notice that answer choice A says a low-fat version, and though, comma, not all of them may be pleasing. That comma is not in the right place. The comma needs to come right after the first independent clause. So we're going to say goodbye to A right now. Now, B, C, and D all have a comma there, which we want. Right? However, though not all of them may be pleasing, is the beginning of our dependent clause. We do not need, that, again, that wasn't one of the places that we told you that you needed to put a comma. Right? We don't need a comma after a though that introduces a dependent clause. So that's it. B and C both have superfluous commas, commas that are not necessary, but actually make them incorrect. So again, the comma rules are nice and hard and fast, and rely on them to get yourself more right answers. Let's go ahead and take a look at our final passage. Just 2 more questions. So keep up the great work. The best discipline is the topic of this passage. Pause, come back when you're ready. Again, another example here that, what comes after the blank is going to be really useful to determining what should go in it. One parenting example feels that blank should be clear about their expectations from the outset so that children will not unknowingly violate rules. Okay. So it is a parenting expert. So we know that parents are important, right? Parents are a very important part of this passage, which suggests that D is probably correct. One parenting expert feels that parents should be clear about their expectations. Now, so if we look at our choices, it's possible that some of these might have been tempting. So let's talk about why they're wrong, because parents does potentially just jump out. But let's just discuss, because, again, knowing the rules and exactly how they're being applied is really, really helpful. One parenting feels that he should be clear about their expectations. Well, one thing about this is that it makes it sound as though it's the parenting expert who wants to be clear. And using the wrong pronoun here actually makes a difference to the meaning of the sentence, right? The parenting expert feels that he should be clear about their expectations. No, parents need to be clear about their expectations, right? And so this pronoun seems to be referring back to the expert, and that wouldn't be correct, right? And there's another issue here, but we'll discuss it when we get to answer choice C. The problem with answer choice B, one parenting expert feels that we should be clear. Now, as a parent myself, and if you're a parent, you may be totally relating to this, being clear about your expectations with your children. So that makes sense up until you get to their expectations, because what's happened here is that you've switched your person. You've gone from we, which is first person, to their, which is a third person possessive pronoun. So that means that we cannot be correct, even though you and I may relate quite strongly to what this passage is saying. And then finally, why would it be wrong to say one parenting expert feels that one should be clear? Because one is this kind of impersonal pronoun that we can use to refer to a sample person, right? So one should be clear about their expectations so that children will not unknowingly violate rules. This actually sounds kind of formal and kind of correct. And the problem with it is that although, if you said one should be clear about their expectations, you could be talking about a mom, You could be talking about a dad you don't know. And so often in speech, when we don't know, whether we're talking about a female person or a male person, we just use they. It's a great stand-in. It can be really, really useful sometimes. The thing is, according to the GED RLA test and the test maker, it's not correct because they is plural, right? And so you can't refer to this singular one with a plural their possessive pronoun. And so here we've got, we'll actually go ahead and annotate these right here. Here we've got a person mismatch. And here we have a number mismatch. So just be sure that when you're answering questions on the GED RLA test, you go by this rule, right? That they always has to refer to more than one person. You can't use they or their to refer to one person. Make sure that's always matched up, because that's the GED rule, and that's the rule that you'll be using on the test. Right? And that ensures that there's only one right answer, because you know there can only be one right answer. And if you weren't sure about that use of why one couldn't match with their, then you know the parents makes it as clear as possible. Right? And so that can also be a criterion that you use to make your choice. Let's go ahead and take a look at our last question. If a child hits or bites in a playgroup, for example, it would be most appropriate not to allow, go ahead and fill this one in, pause if you would like and come back when you're ready to review. All right. If a child hits or bites in a playgroup, and that child is actually important because if we go to the answer choices, we're going to do something to this child for a short time. And again, if you're a parent, and even if you're not, you probably imagine that we're going to separate the child for a short time. Okay. Answer choices say that we're not going to allow the child to play with the group. Okay? And so, again, we've got some interesting number issues going on here that can be subtle. So let's go through these choices one by one. We've got a child who hits or bites in a playgroup. And what's really interesting about this and good to pay attention to is that while you know that that playgroup has a bunch of kids in it, it's only one group. And so what that means is, honestly, the clearest way to handle this is just to refer back to the child and back to the group, because there are so many ways, so many little traps that you could fall into if you don't do that. Fortunately for us, we have an answer choice that does just that, right? So C is correct, but oops, sorry about that. A little trigger pen there. Let's take a look, because can we say it would be most appropriate not to allow the child to play with them? Well, and in fact, I think I want to change my annotation here, my highlights here a little bit. Let's get rid of that guy and make him blue instead. Okay, them, you can make sense of this. It's referring back to the other children in the group, but because the sentence just used the group as a single group, that's one group, and you can't use the plural pronoun them to refer to it. Right? It is a play group. You'd have to actually say for the child to play with it, and that would sound terrible, so you'd never use that pronoun there, okay? Because you can't use them, and it would sound too awkward. So, all right, let's get rid of answer choice A. Answer choice B, them and them. Well, again, we've already discussed why them is a problem, but we can't refer back to the child as them either for the same reason that we discussed in the previous question. It is a single child. A single child would have to be him or her. Notice that he or she is being used here as kind of a model for you to help you remember, right? And you can get clues from the passages to help you remember that you can't just use they, even if we don't know whether it's a boy child or a girl child, right? So can't do that in answer choice B. And then in D, something funky has happened with the verb here, right? It will be most appropriate not to allow the child to play with them. So we know that a child plays, but here we're using this infinitive, and we wouldn't say to plays with them. So answer choice D is out. So that was a ton of practice, and I hope you found it really, really helpful to see all of these different types of issues and errors and concerns that the test maker might bring in to the writing portion of the RLA test. So, a lot of different categories. You may find that certain of these errors are tougher for you to note than others, and in that case, definitely make note of them and write them down, and make sure that you are kind of, again, honing your radar for those types of errors. Okay? Everything's got to agree, everything's got to be parallel. You need to use the right prepositions, the right pronouns. You need to agree, singular, plural. And you're thinking about things like, here's a pronoun. What does it refer to? This has an apostrophe. Is it a contraction or a possessive? Right? And again, the more you practice, the easier all that is going to come. So do keep up the great work. As always, we hope that you will contact us. We implore you to contact us, actually, at our inbox, gedhelp@kaplan.com, anytime you have any questions at all in your practice or about anything that we covered in any one of these lessons, whether you watch it live or recorded. Thank you so much for being with me today for this session, and good luck with your studying, with your practice, and with your GED RLA test.